Hello and welcome to 9-inch Charge. Dan here, and today we've got another Warscroll review coming up, and we're going to have a look at the KRONDSPINE INCARNATE of GHUR. We did previously look at some leaked rules for this, but they weren't extensive, it wasn't the complete rules, but now we have everything, so we're going to review the Warscroll and additional rules in its entirety and see how it performs on the tabletop. Just before we begin, please be sure to hit the like button if this is content that you enjoy, and please be sure to subscribe to the channel if you would like to see more like this in the future. Okay, so let's start having a look at the rules around how you use an incarnate on the tabletop just before we get into the Warscroll itself. So the first thing to talk about is bonding. An incarnate must be bonded to a hero in the army it is part of. Bonding an incarnate to a hero is a unique enhancement. Record which hero the incarnate is bonded to on your army roster. A hero cannot be bonded to more than one incarnate, and an incarnate cannot be bonded to more than one hero. An army that includes an incarnate cannot include any other allied units. However, an incarnate can be included in the army even if its points cost exceed the maximum number of points you can spend on allied units in the battle pack you are using. And whilst we're on the subject of a hero that is bonded to the incarnate, we can talk about wild form. If the hero an incarnate is bonded to is slain, the incarnate reverts to its wild form. The incarnate in wild form remains part of your army, but treats other units in your army as enemy units, and other units in your army treat it as an enemy unit. In addition, special rules apply to an incarnate in its wild form as described on its Warscroll. So, pretty straightforward. In summary, you bind it to one of your heroes, and it's taken instead of allies. And you better hope the hero that's bonded to doesn't die, otherwise it's going to go into its wild form and it's going to start attacking your own units as well as enemy units. When we get to the Warscroll, you'll see that the incarnate doesn't have a wound characteristic, so how it takes damage is a little bit different to usual. In fact, it's very different to usual. So the first thing to talk about are its states and then how it takes damage. Incarnates have states. Each state has a level and a domination range as shown on the state table on its Warscroll. Incarnates start a battle at level 2, the primal state. Under certain circumstances, an incarnate's level can go up or down, and when this happens, their state changes to that of the new level. For example, if an incarnate's level went from 2 to 3, it would go from a primal state to an empowered state. An incarnate can never go above level 3, and it is removed from play when it reaches level 0. So if you take one, you're going to want to empower it and make it more powerful. And if you're against one, you're going to have to want to reduce its power level to 0, and then it is removed from play the same way that it has been slain. Wounds are allocated to incarnates the same way as they are to any other model. However, because the incarnate does not have a wounds characteristic, it cannot be slain. Instead, in the battle shock phase, if any wounds are allocated to an incarnate, its commanding player rolls 3d6. If the roll is less than or equal to the number of rolls allocated to the incarnate, its level is reduced by 1. Then all of the wounds allocated to the incarnate are healed. An incarnate is treated as having a wounds characteristic of 18 for all rules purposes other than determining if it is slain. If an incarnate is affected by an ability that slays the target without any wounds or mortal wounds being allocated, then the level of the incarnate goes down by 1 instead. Okay, again, so just to summarise, you can keep allocating wounds to it, and in the battle shock phase you roll 3d6, and if the dice roll is less than or equal to the number of wounds allocated, the incarnate's level is reduced by 1, and then it's healed back up. So it is going to take multiple turns in order to destroy one of these things. Starting at level 2, the quickest way you're going to be able to destroy one is in 2 battle shock phases, so it will take 2 turns, at least. Okay, now with the groundwork laid down with those rules, we're ready to look at the Warscroll. The KRONDSPINE INCARNATE of GHUR has a move of 12, a bravery of 10, a save of 4+, and carries the keywords Incarnate, GHUR, Monster, KRONDSPINE Incarnate, and is treated as a behemoth and comes in at 400 points. Straight away, the first thing that strikes me is that it has a really good move characteristic of 12, and also on its Warscroll it has the fly special rule, so it's able to get where it wants quite easily. It is on a really large base, however. So if your opponent is very clever with how much space they leave between their units, they can leave it so that it cannot land exactly where it wants to go, and it still may have to go headlong into your opponent rather than jumping over them and hurdling the front rank. But nonetheless, this is very good. Save of 4+ is great. All-out defense can make this a 3+ as well if we need to. and it can receive commands, but only from the hero that it is bound to. What I like about it having a 4+ save is, I actually think that its rule mechanic for dropping down levels makes it difficult to kill anyway, and now having, if there's no rend characteristic, 50% of these wounds negated by saves anyway, it does make it really hardy, and definitely as it should be for a model that is 400 points. A Krondspine Incarnate of Ghur is armed with vicious claws and tearing fangs. This has a really cool mechanic around it because you add the Incarnate's level to the attack's characteristic of these. So as it powers up, it gets more lethal, and as it powers down, it becomes less lethal. So you start at power level 2, the highest you can get to is 3, and the lowest you can get to is 1 before you're abolished at 0. So the first melee weapon, the Vicious Claws, has an attack's characteristic of 6 attacks. This is actually anywhere between 7 and 9. They have a 1-inch range, 3s to hit, 3s to wound, a rend of 2, and a damage of 2. And I think that that's really great. 9 of these would be really significant, and especially as you've already said, you can issue commands, so with all-out attack, and that's the one that you're going to be wanting to use when we'll look at abilities later on, you're looking at potentially 9 attacks, 2s then 3s, rend 2, damage 2, for a potential 18 damage just off this attack. This will absolutely chew through your opponent's battle line forces, and be scary as well for their bigger units. That rend is really going to be helpful. The next attack is Tearing Fangs, and this has a range of 2 and attack's characteristic base of 1, so anywhere between 2 and 4 attacks. It again hits on 3s, it wounds on 2s, and it has a rend of 3 and a damage of flat 4 that never degrades. Now we are talking. Let's get this thing empowered. Let's put all-out attack on it. 4 attacks, 2s and 2s, rend 3, and then 4 damage flat. And then we're looking at a potential additional 16 damage. 2s and 2s, rend 3 is just phenomenal. This is the monster you need this edition to chew through your opponent when they're doing all-out defense, because all-out defense may increase their save characteristic by 1, but there's no getting away from rend 3. This in total gives us a potential 34 combat damage a turn. This is huge. This is 1 wound off taking a Mega Gargant out in 1 turn if all those wounds were to go through. But with that said and done, let's have a look at its abilities and let's see what else it brings to the tabletop, because it doesn't end here. Let's have a look at the state table, because that will inform how we think about the other rules. So, as we've previously said, it has 3 power levels and then 0 for when it's abolished. And at level 3, when it's empowered, its domination range, which affects the range of the other abilities, is 12. When it's primal, it's 10. And when it's weakened, it's 8. So let's carry on and let's look at the other rules with that in the back of our minds. So firstly is bonding. This incarnate can only receive commands issued by the hero it is bonded to. If the all-out attack command is received by the incarnate, the command is also received by all friendly units that are wholly within the domination range of the incarnate and that are within 3 inches of an enemy unit and that have not already received the command that phase. Add 1 to casting and unbinding rolls for wizards that are within its domination range for an incarnate that they are bonded to. Well, that is just fantastic, isn't it? So if you have this in the middle of your unit, if you're in a multi-combat, or I say in the middle of your army if you're in a multi-combat, but wholly within 12 either side of this massive base is a huge distance across the battlefield. So that all-out attack command just becomes really great. So not only is it really effective on its own, it will also amplify the effectiveness of your other forces on the tabletop. And the +1 to casting, dispelling, and unbinding for wizards that they're bound to if they're within the domination range is a nice bonus as well. I don't think it's quite as effective as this all-out attack bubble that it's going to produce, but it's nice to have. So now suddenly, pretty much your whole army can become much more effective when they're in combat, when you've got one of these on your side. The next rule is empowerment. If a monster is slain by wounds inflicted by this incarnate's attacks, this increases the incarnate's level by 1. This is a cool rule, very thematic. I like the idea of it smashing down monsters and powering itself up. Maybe adding its bones to the swirling ones it's already got around it. I think that's very cool, a very thematic way of increasing its level. Next we have Wild Form. So as you remember, Wild Form is what happens if your hero that is bound to the incarnate is slain. So Wild Form is add 1 to hit rolls for attacks made by this incarnate while it's in its wild form. This incarnate can run and still charge in the same turn whilst it's in wild form. If this incarnate is in its wild form and it is wholly within 12 inches of a unit or an endless spell at the start of your charge phase, it must attempt to charge and must make a charge move if it is possible to do so. And this includes your own units. Personally, I think this is going to be so fun to see, and adds an extra layer of strategy to your opponent, because you might not necessarily want to try and level down and wipe out the Incarnate of Ghur. You might want to target the hero that it's bound to and then let it just go wild through the enemy ranks. Next is Inflamed Savagery. Warriors that are exposed to a Kronspine Incarnate are likely to be driven mad by their own inflamed savagery. The following effects apply to all units that are wholly within the domination range of the Incarnate. This unit's commanding player can reroll run and charge rolls for the unit. The unit cannot retreat. If the unit is a wizard that is not bonded to the Incarnate, subtract 1 from casting and dispelling and unbinding rolls for that wizard. So this is a frenzy that it just puts on the whole battlefield, friend or foe. Its primal energy just pulsating out from its centre where the realm stone is, turning people into primal savages. I think of all of those, Can't Retreat is the biggest. It's quite interesting for me that you could put an Incarnate somewhere and then force your opponent to have to stay in the combat and then not retreat out of it. I think there's some tactical masterminds out there who will really put that to great use. And the second to last rule is Arcane Predator. Incarnates of Ghur are ferocious predators hunting both living creatures and arcane entities with equal ferocity. And what this means is that in your charge phase, if the Incarnate is within 12 inches of an endless spell that was summoned by an enemy wizard, it can attempt to charge. And it can make a charge move as long as that charge move finishes within half an inch of an enemy model or endless spell that was summoned by an enemy wizard. And in addition, it can carry out its final ability, which is a unique monstrous rampage below instead of any other monstrous rampage that it can carry out. And this monstrous rampage is Devour Endless Spell. Pick one endless spell that was summoned by an enemy wizard and that is within 3 inches of this Incarnate and roll 2d6. Add this Incarnate's level to the roll. If the roll is greater than the casting value of the spell used to summon that endless spell is dispelled and the level of the Incarnate is increased by 1. On any other roll, the level of the Incarnate is reduced by 1. This is a little bit of a double-edged sword, but let's just take law of averages and say you roll a 7 and you start at your power level of 2. You're going to on average roll about a 9. You're going to want to see, how badly this endless spell is affecting you, because you don't want to level down your Incarnate or even abolish it unnecessarily. But this does now free up your wizard. If your Incarnate is dealing with the endless spells, your wizard is free to do whatever they like elsewhere. And that is everything. So let me know what you think in the comments about this. Let me know if you will be taking one. I know it's a bit of a shame that you can only get one by buying this scenery set. Will you be converting one of your own instead? I, for one, cannot wait to use one on the tabletop. I think it sounds so fun and so interesting, and I really, really like the aspect of it going wild and attacking your own units. I kind of like the idea, and I think I said this in a previous video, of just having one that is just not on anybody's side anyway, just roaming the tabletop, and you just have to be really fearful of it and what it might do. But when you do have one on side, my goodness, has it got some output, and isn't it a great force multiplier for your own army? So I'm really looking forward to seeing how these play. I think we'll definitely see these appearing on the tournament scene. I think there's going to be some really good combos for these. As I said, if you have anything that springs to mind, make sure you leave a comment. And if you've enjoyed this video, please be sure to like it. And if you'd like to see more like this in the future, please subscribe. This has been 9 Inch Charge, and as ever, I will catch you next time.